21 Savage is done for. I'm not even playing right now. The numbers just dropped for his new album, What Happened to the Streets, and folks online are saying this might be the biggest flop of his entire career. Peg a second. We're talking about a massive drop, like career-altering type numbers. The internet is absolutely spinning because this is the same dude who was just on top of the game, dropping platinum records left and right. And now we're looking at numbers that got people questioning if 21 Savage still got it. And wait till you hear what he was doing just 3 hours before the album dropped. This whole situation is straight mind-blowing. Alright, so everybody thought they knew what was about to happen with this album, right? 21 Savage been building momentum. He had that massive American Dream album that literally broke the internet, and people were expecting What Happened to the Streets to follow that same energy. That was the narrative everyone was running with. Fans were hyped, the rollout seemed solid, and this was supposed to be his moment to remind everybody why he's one of the coldest in the game. But yo, when those first day Spotify numbers hit, the whole narrative started twisting. I'm talking about a complete 180. What we thought was going to be another victory lap for 21 turned into one of the most shocking underperformances in recent hip-hop history. And now, with all this data coming out, the streaming numbers, the listener drop-off rates, and the comparisons to other artists, people are asking some serious questions about what's really going on with 21 Savage's career right now. Let me break down these numbers for you because this is where things get absolutely crazy. What Happened to the Streets dropped in Q4, end of the year, prime album season, and recorded 13.1 million first-day streams on Spotify. Now, if you don't follow music industry numbers, that might sound pretty good, right? Wrong. Let me put this in perspective for you. 21 Savage's last album, American Dream, debuted with 42.1 million first-day Spotify streams. You hearing me? 42.1 million. That means What Happened to the Streets pulled in approximately 1/3, just 31% of what American Dream did on opening day. That's not just a dip, that's a straight-up collapse. And it gets even crazier when you start looking at his entire discography. Fans online turned into full-blown investigators. I'm talking deep dive, spreadsheet level analysis. And they started pulling up the numbers from all his past projects. I Was, higher first day numbers. Savage Mode 2, higher. Her Loss with Drake, way higher. Even going back through his catalog, you can see that this new album is literally performing worse than projects he dropped years ago, when streaming wasn't even as dominant as it is now. But hold on, because the streaming data gets even more revealing. Online detectives, and I'm talking about the data nerds who live for this stuff, they got access to track-by-track engagement metrics, pause for emphasis, and what they found is honestly shocking. The data shows that a massive chunk of listeners didn't even finish the album. We're talking about people dropping off before they even hit the midpoint of the track list. Think about that. You got fans who are supposedly waiting for this album. They click play on release night and they can't even make it halfway through before they tap out? Now, the album's got 14 tracks total, right? And reportedly, the second half actually shows better retention than the first half, which is wild because usually it's the opposite. People finish strong on the opening tracks and then drop off. But in this case, it's like listeners were struggling through the beginning, and by the time they got to the back half, the damage was already done.
And check this out. Fans been comparing his rollout to what else dropped around the same time. You got Nas and DJ Premier dropping a joint album that went #1 on iTunes. #1, above 21 Savage. Nas and DJ Premier are legends, no disrespect, but these are dudes from a completely different era, and they're out charting a current mainstream trap star on one of the biggest platforms. Let that sink in. The comparisons don't stop there. People been pulling up 2025 releases from Mac Miller's estate, Lil Tecca, Central C, artists across different lanes and putting them next to 21's numbers. And the pattern that's emerging is not looking good. Multiple artists who were in that Drake collaborative era, we're talking Drake himself, 21 Savage, Young Thug, Lil Baby, they're all showing lower performance in their 2025 releases compared to their peak years. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar drops GNX, Tyler the Creator drops Chromacopia, Playboi Carti teasing his stuff, and those projects are dominating. The gap between those artists and 21 right now is massive. Now, let's get into the motive behind what might have caused this situation, because this is where everything starts clicking together. 21 Savage been dealing with some interesting career shifts over the past few years. Think about it. This dude went from being the cold, mysterious street rapper who everybody feared and respected to becoming more mainstream, doing pop features, linking with Drake on multiple projects, and expanding his sound. That evolution brought him massive success. American Dream was proof of that. But here's where things get tricky. When you look at the rollout for What Happened to the Streets, something feels off. The album title itself, What Happened to the Streets, suggests he's trying to reconnect with that original, raw energy that made him a star. It's like a conceptual statement, a question being posed to the culture about where hip-hop's headed and where the authenticity went. Let that sink in. That's heavy. That's the kind of album that needs proper context, proper rollout, proper messaging. So what does 21 do? Approximately 3 hours before the album drops, he sits down for an interview. Now, you think this interview would be all about the album, right? Breaking down the concept, explaining the title, talking about the production, the features, the creative process, all the stuff that gets fans invested in the project. But nope. Instead, the interview goes viral, and I mean viral, because 21 spent the whole time talking about Drake versus Kendrick Lamar beef, commenting on Atlanta's rap scene, and throwing around this whole crash out city narrative. Yo, let's keep it real for a second. That interview completely overshadowed his album. People were so caught up in the drama, the hot takes, the shots being fired, that by the time the album actually dropped at midnight, the conversation wasn't about 21's music anymore. It was about who he was talking about and what he said about the culture. That's a rollout disaster. You just fumbled your own moment. And this brings up a bigger question about where 21's head is at right now. The man dropped an album called What Happened to the Streets, which implies he's trying to have a serious conversation about the state of hip-hop and authenticity. But his actions right before release suggest he's more interested in staying relevant through controversy and viral moments than through the actual music. Let that sit. That disconnect, fans felt it, and the numbers reflect it. Now compare that to how Kendrick rolled out GNX, mysterious, focused entirely on the music, let the art speak for itself. Or Tyler with Chromacopia, creative visuals, cohesive aesthetic, every move calculated to support the album's concept. Those are artists who understood the assignment. They knew that in 2025, with so much music dropping every single week, you can't just throw an album out there and hope for the best. You gotta control the narrative. You gotta make people care about the music first. And look, I'm not even saying 21 Savage fell off talent-wise. The album's got some solid tracks. There's a joint with Young Nudy called Step Brothers that people are messing with, and there's a Drake collab on there too, which is their first in a few years. But even that Drake feature couldn't save the numbers. Think about that. A few years ago, a 21 Savage and Drake collaboration would have been an automatic chart topper, guaranteed streaming gold. Now, it barely moves the needle. That kind of fall off hits different. It's not just about one album underperforming, it's about what it represents. It shows that the audience is evolving faster than some of these artists are. Fans aren't just looking for music anymore. They want a complete experience. They want concept. They want intentionality. They want to feel like the artist actually cares about what they're putting out. And when your rollout is focused on beef commentary instead of your art, that sends a message, and not a good one. But here's the part that really hits different, and I think this is what people aren't talking about enough. Behind all these numbers and all this industry analysis, there's a real artist who poured time, energy, and probably a lot of personal emotion into this project. Like, let's not forget that What Happened to the Streets as a concept is actually a legitimate question that deserves to be explored. 21 Savage came up in a very specific era of Atlanta hip-hop. The streets raised him. His early music was raw, unfiltered, and connected to a reality that a lot of people either lived or were fascinated by. That authenticity is what made him a star. So when he asks what happened to the streets, he's really asking what happened to that connection, that rawness, that hunger that used to define hip-hop. That's a real conversation. And the tragic part? Nobody's even talking about that. The conversation got hijacked, first by his own interview choices, and then by the disappointing numbers. So now, instead of people sitting with the music and engaging with the themes he's trying to explore, everybody's just looking at Spotify stats and making jokes about the drop-off. That's messed up. That's an artist's worst nightmare, putting your heart into something and having it reduced to a punchline. And yo, think about the pressure he's under right now. Pause. After American Dream did 42 million first-day streams, the expectations were sky high. Everybody wanted him to match or exceed that. The label wanted it, the fans wanted it, the industry wanted it. That's an insane amount of pressure. And when you're trying to meet those expectations while also trying to make a conceptual statement about the culture, while also dealing with the fact that the whole hip-hop landscape is shifting under your feet, man, that's a lot to carry.
And let's keep it 100. There's probably people around him who aren't helping the situation. You got managers, publicists, label executives, all these voices telling him what he should do, how he should move, what'll get the most attention. And somewhere in all that noise, the actual artistry gets lost. That's the music industry in a nutshell, and it's been destroying artists for decades. You start chasing streams and virality instead of making music that actually means something.
I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, even if we're not rappers. You ever worked hard on something, a project at work, a creative endeavor, something you really cared about, and then watched it get overlooked or misunderstood? That frustration is real. Now multiply that by the millions of people watching, judging, and commenting. That's what 21's dealing with right now. And honestly, that takes a toll on your mental health, your confidence, your whole relationship with your craft. And before people start with the, "Oh, he's rich, he'll be fine" comments, yeah, financially, he's straight, but that doesn't mean this doesn't hurt. Artists are human. They tie their identity and self-worth to their work, especially in hip-hop, where authenticity and respect mean everything. Watching your album underperform and become a topic of mockery online, that cuts deep, regardless of how much money's in your account. Now, this whole situation gets even crazier when you start breaking down the actual listener behavior data, because it's not just about the total numbers, it's about how people are consuming the album. And this is where you can really see the shift in what audiences expect from music in 2025. So, streaming platforms like Spotify track everything. I'm talking about which songs people skip, which songs they replay, at what point in a song people tend to drop off, how many people add songs to playlists, how many people finish the full album versus just hitting a few tracks. It's a whole science. And when that data came out for what happened to the streets, it told a very specific story. The data shows that listener drop-off was happening before the midpoint of the album. That means people were tapping out somewhere around track 6 or 7 out of 14 total tracks. Now, why does that matter? Because it shows that the sequencing, the pacing, the way the album was structured, it wasn't holding people's attention. In today's climate, you got maybe 15, 20 minutes to hook a listener before they decide whether they're gonna rock with the full project or move on to something else. And apparently, 21's album wasn't passing that test for a lot of people. But here's where it gets interesting. The second half of the album actually shows better retention, so the people who made it past that midpoint, they were more likely to finish the album. That suggests that maybe the back half is actually stronger, or maybe those are just the die-hard fans who are going to finish regardless. Either way, it creates this weird situation where the best part of your album is the part that most people never even get to. That's a rollout and sequencing problem. Meanwhile, fans online been working like full-blown analysts, pulling up comparison charts between 21's current numbers and not just his own past projects, but other artists dropping in the same window. And the contrasts are stark. You got artists like Nas, a legend who's been in the game for 30+ years, dropping a collaborative album with DJ Premier, and it goes #1 on iTunes, beating out 21's new release. Think about the optics of that. Nas is 51 years old. He's not chasing TikTok trends. He's not doing viral interviews. He's just making quality hip-hop with one of the greatest producers ever, and it's outselling the new generation. And that brings up something fascinating that got mentioned in the discussions around this situation. Approximately 50% of people who consumed the Clips album did so through physical or owned formats, not streaming. To let that sink in, they bought CDs, vinyl records, or purchased the digital download. That's a completely different consumption model. It shows that there's still a segment of hip-hop fans who value ownership, who want to support artists directly, and who aren't just passively streaming. So when you compare 21 Savage's streaming-dependent model to these legacy artists who still have a strong physical sales base, it raises questions about sustainability. What happens when the streaming algorithms change? What happens when playlists stop pushing your music? What happens when the next hot artist comes along and takes your spot? If you don't have that core fan base that's actually invested in you, not just casually streaming, then you're vulnerable. And let's talk about the bigger pattern here, because it's not just 21 Savage. The script specifically mentions that several artists from that Drake collaborative era, Drake himself, 21 Savage, Young Thug, Lil Baby, they're all experiencing lower performance in their 2025 releases compared to past years. All of them. That's not a coincidence. That's a shift. What we're witnessing is a generational changing of the guard. The sound that dominated 2016, 2021, that moody, melodic trap vibe that Drake pioneered and artists like 21 Savage perfected, is not hitting the same way anymore. Audiences are craving something different. They want the experimental energy of Playboi Carti. They want the lyrical and conceptual depth of Kendrick Lamar. They want the genre-bending creativity of Tyler, the Creator. And that trap sound that felt so fresh 5 years ago is starting to feel dated. And let's keep it real, 21 Savage's situation is also a cautionary tale about oversaturation. When they're constantly dropping features, doing collaborations, staying in the headlines for non-music reasons, you risk diluting your brand. People stop seeing you as an event. Your album becomes just another release in an endless stream of content. And in 2025, with so much music dropping every single Friday, you need to be an event. You need people to stop what they're doing and pay attention. 21's rollout didn't create that urgency. Now, I'm not saying all this to pile on. Like I said earlier, there's real artistry and real intention behind what happened to the streets. But intention doesn't matter if the execution is off. And the numbers are showing us that something in the execution, whether it's the rollout, the timing, the sound, the messaging, or all of the above, it didn't connect the way it needed to. What we're seeing here is way bigger than just one album underperforming. This is about the entire landscape of hip-hop in 2025 and what it means to be a relevant artist in an era where the rules are being rewritten in real time. First, let's talk about the rollout game. The way artists used to be able to just drop music and let it speak for itself, that era is over. In 2025, you need a full multimedia experience. You need visuals that match the aesthetic. You need interviews that support your artistic vision. You need social media moments that build anticipation rather than distract from it. Every single piece of the rollout has to work together like a machine. And when even one part is off, the whole thing can collapse. Look at how Kendrick Lamar moved with GNX. Everything was cryptic, mysterious, and focused on the music. The surprise drop created genuine buzz. The lack of excessive promo made people lean in closer. He understood that in an oversaturated market, sometimes less is more. Then you got Tyler, the Creator, with Chromacopia, a full visual identity, a clear aesthetic, a world that fans could step into. That's how you make your album feel like an event. 21 Savage's rollout for What Happened to the Streets had none of that cohesion. The viral interview about Drake versus Kendrick 3 hours before release, that's reactive, not strategic. It's chasing a moment instead of creating one. And in the process, it completely shifted the conversation away from his album. That's self-sabotage, whether it was intentional or not. Second, let's talk about conceptual depth. Audiences in 2025 are smarter and more demanding than ever before. They've been trained by artists like Kendrick, J. Cole, and Tyler to expect albums that say something, that have a narrative, that take them on a journey. What Happened to the Streets, as a title, suggests that kind of depth. It's asking a question about culture, about authenticity, about what's been lost in hip-hop's evolution. But did the rollout and the conversation around the album actually explore that question? Not really. So fans didn't know what they were getting into, and when they pressed play, maybe it didn't meet expectations. And here's the thing. When you set up a conceptual premise with your album title, you better deliver on it. Fans are going to come in expecting a certain level of introspection, storytelling, and thematic consistency. If the album is just a collection of solid trap songs without that deeper connective tissue, people feel cheated. They feel like you promised them a full meal and gave them appetizers. That disappointment shows up in the streaming numbers. Third, let's talk about streaming economics and how they're changing artist behavior. The way streaming payouts work, artists need millions of streams just to make decent money. So there's this pressure to make music that's immediately catchy, that fits into playlists, that keeps people from hitting skip. But that pressure can also make music feel generic. It can strip away the rough edges, the experimentation, the risks that make an artist special in the first place. 21 Savage built his career on being different. He had a unique voice, a cold delivery, and a perspective that felt authentic to his experience. But as he's gotten bigger and more mainstream, there's been this push to sand down those edges, to make it more palatable, more playlist-friendly. And maybe What Happened to the Streets was his attempt to push back against that, to reclaim some of that original rawness. But if the music itself doesn't fully commit to that, then the title just feels like branding. The bigger conversation here is about responsibility, both from the artist and from the platforms. Artists have a responsibility to their fans and to the culture to put thought and care into what they release. Not every album has to be a masterpiece, but it should at least feel intentional. And platforms like Spotify have a responsibility to not just push whatever gets the most immediate clicks, but to actually support artistry and give albums room to breathe and find their audience over time. Because here's what happens when we let the algorithm completely dictate what gets heard. We lose diversity in sound. We lose risk-taking. We lose the artists who want to challenge listeners and push boundaries because they know that won't get them on the biggest playlists. And that's how hip-hop becomes stale. That's how we end up with 50 artists who all sound the same because they're all chasing the same algorithmic formula. 21 Savage's situation is a microcosm of all of this. He's an artist caught between wanting to make meaningful, conceptual music and feeling the pressure to deliver streaming hits. He's trying to ask important questions about the culture while also staying relevant in a news cycle that rewards controversy over substance. And the result is an album rollout that feels confused and numbers that reflect that confusion. So what does this mean for the future? It means artists need to get real clear on who they are and what they're trying to say. It means rollouts need to be strategic, not reactive. It means the music itself has to be strong enough to cut through the noise. And it means fans need to be willing to give albums more than just a surface-level listen. We gotta engage with the art, not just consume it passively and move on to the next thing. Now, let's dive even deeper into how What Happened to the Streets stacks up against other releases, because this is where you really see the full picture of what's happening in hip-hop right now. And trust me, when you line up all these numbers side by side, the story becomes even more interesting. So, we already talked about how the album did 13.1 million first-day Spotify streams compared to American Dream's 42.1 million. But let's expand that view. In 2025 alone, we've seen releases from Mac Miller's Estate, Lil Tecca, Central C, and obviously the heavy hitters like Kendrick and Tyler. When fans started comparing 21's numbers to those projects, patterns started emerging that are honestly shocking. Mac Miller's posthumous release, an artist who tragically passed away years ago, pulled comparable or better engagement in certain metrics than 21's new album. That's not a dig in Mac at all. It speaks to his legacy and the love fans still have for him. But it also shows that 21, who's actively here, actively promoting, actively in the public eye, couldn't generate the same level of immediate enthusiasm. That's a problem. Lil Tecca, an artist from a newer generation who doesn't have 21's mainstream penetration or cultural cachet, dropped a project that held listener attention better based on the track-by-track retention data. Central C, coming from the UK drill scene, generated more conversation and cultural momentum with his release. These aren't artists who are necessarily bigger than 21 Savage in terms of overall career success, but in this particular moment, they executed better. And then you got Kendrick, Tyler, and the anticipation around Cardi. Those are the artists that completely dominated the conversation in late 2024 and into 2025. Kendrick's GNX was a cultural moment. People were dissecting every bar, every reference, every production choice. Tyler's Chromacopia had fans camping out for merch, dressing up in the aesthetic, fully immersing themselves in the world he created. That's the level of engagement 21 should have been aiming for with a conceptual title like What Happened to the Streets. But here's what's really fascinating, and honestly kind of sad. Multiple artists who came up during or were heavily associated with that Drake collaborative era are all struggling right now. Drake's own recent releases haven't hit the way they used to. Young Thug's dealing with legal issues, but even beyond that, the sound he pioneered feels less dominant. Lil Baby's last project underperformed expectations, and now 21 Savage with these numbers. It's like that whole wave that defined a specific era of hip-hop is crashing. And that makes sense from a cultural cycles perspective, right? Every generation of hip-hop eventually gives way to the next.
The G-Funk era gave way to the Bling era, which gave way to the blog era, which gave way to the SoundCloud era, which gave way to the melodic trap era. And now we're in this post-genre era where artists like Tyler, Cardi, and even Kendrick are pulling from everything: jazz, punk, electronic, experimental sounds, and creating something that doesn't fit neatly into boxes. So 21 Savage, who's so identified with that specific trap sound and that specific Atlanta vibe, is now facing the challenge of either evolving with the times or risk becoming a relic of a past era. And What Happened to the Streets might have been his attempt to address that exact tension, to ask the question of whether that rawness and that street authenticity still has a place in modern hip-hop. But ironically, the way the album performed suggests that audiences might be answering that question with a resounding, "We moved on." Now, that's harsh, and I don't think it's entirely fair because 21 clearly still has talent, still has something to say, but the market is ruthless. Fans are fickle, attention spans are shorter than ever, and if you don't capture people in that immediate moment, it's really hard to win them back later. That's just the reality of the streaming era. And going back to that Nas and DJ Premier comparison for a second, the fact that their album went #1 on iTunes while 21's didn't even crack the top spot speaks to something deeper. It speaks to the difference between artists who have a dedicated, invested fan base versus artists who rely on casual streaming listeners. Nas's fans are the type who will buy an album, who will support intentionally, who will show up because they value the artistry. They're not just passively consuming. 21 needs to cultivate more of that type of fan base because streaming numbers are great when they're high, but they're also incredibly volatile. One algorithm change, one shift in playlist politics, one new artist that captures the moment, and suddenly you're not on top anymore. But if you have people who are genuinely invested in you as an artist, who care about your perspective and your growth, they'll stick with you through the ups and downs. The comparisons also highlight the importance of timing. Dropping in Q4 means you're competing with year-end releases, with people's retrospective best-of lists already forming, with attention being divided between new music and revisiting the year's biggest hits. It's a crowded, competitive window, and if your rollout isn't airtight, you're going to get lost in the shuffle, which is essentially what happened here. Now, the big question everybody's asking, what does this mean for 21 Savage's legacy and where does he go from here? Because this isn't just about one album's numbers, this is about how an artist responds to adversity and whether they can adapt to a changing landscape. First, let's be clear, 21 Savage is not done. Firm. He's had too much success, too much cultural impact, and too much talent to be written off because of one underperforming album. Artists go through cycles. Albums flop. That's part of the game. What matters is what you do next. Do you learn from it? Do you come back stronger? Do you dig deeper and make something that reminds people why they fell in love with your music in the first place? Look at artists like T.I., who had a massive peak, then went through a down period, and then came back with renewed energy and found a new lane as an elder statesman. Or Gucci Mane, who came home from prison and had a resurgence by being consistent and authentic. Or even someone like Pusha T, who's never been the biggest streaming artist, but he's built a legacy based on quality and respect from the culture. 21 has the opportunity to take a similar path. But he's got to make some changes. The rollout strategy needs to be completely rethought. No more doing interviews that distract from the music. No more letting controversy overshadow artistry. If you're gonna make a conceptual album, the entire campaign needs to support that concept. Visuals, interviews, social media, features, all of it needs to point back to the core message. That's how you control the narrative. Second, he needs to figure out his sound for this next chapter. Is he doubling down on that raw trap sound that made him famous? Is he experimenting with new production styles? Is he getting more introspective and personal? Is he going full concept album mode? Pause. Whatever the choice is, it needs to feel authentic and committed. Half measures don't work. Fans can smell when an artist is being tentative or trying to please everyone. You gotta pick a lane and go hard in it. Third, and this might be controversial, but he needs to be more selective with collaborations. The Drake partnership was incredible for a time, but if that sound and that era is cooling off, then constantly running back to it might be holding him back. Pause. Maybe it's time to work with producers he's never worked with. Maybe it's time to feature artists from outside his usual circle. Fresh collaborations can bring fresh energy and introduce you to new audiences.
Fourth, he's got to rebuild that direct connection with his core fan base. And I don't mean just posting on Instagram. I mean really engaging. Maybe it's doing smaller, more intimate shows. Maybe it's being more vulnerable and open in his music. Maybe it's creating a community around his artistry that goes beyond just streaming numbers. Because, like we talked about with Nas, if you have people who are truly invested, they'll ride with you regardless of what the charts say. Now, legacy-wise, this album won't define him. Bank Account, A Lot, his work on Her Loss, his features on massive songs, those are still part of his story. But this moment will be a test. How he responds, the music he makes next, the evolution we see, that's what will shape how people remember this chapter. Pause. Every great artist has a stumble. It's whether you get back up that determines greatness. And let's also acknowledge the industry side of this. Labels, management, publicists, they all play a role in these rollouts. And sometimes artists get bad advice. Sometimes the people around them are more concerned with generating buzz and quick hits than with long-term artistic development. Pause. 21 might need to evaluate his team and make sure everyone around him is aligned with the vision of where he wants to go as an artist, not just where they think he can make the most money. Because here's the thing, at a certain point, it's not even about the numbers anymore. It's about creative fulfillment. It's about being able to look back at your catalog and feel proud. It's about making music that challenges you, that means something to you, regardless of whether it goes platinum or gets playlist placement. Pause. And maybe what happened to the streets is the beginning of 21 embracing that mindset. Maybe the low numbers sting right now, but in 5 years, he'll look back and realize this was the album where he started prioritizing artistry over commercial expectations. I genuinely hope that's the case, sincere tone, because the hip-hop landscape is better when we have diverse voices, when we have artists who can represent different perspectives and different sounds. 21 Savage's voice, that cold, matter-of-fact delivery, that street authenticity, it's valuable. It deserves to be part of the conversation, but it's on him to make sure he stays in the conversation by making moves that remind people why he matters. So, while this album might be a disappointment in terms of numbers, it doesn't have to be the end of the story. It could be a turning point, a moment where 21 reassesses, regroups, and comes back with something that's even more focused and more powerful. The question is, will he seize that opportunity? Now, before we wrap this up, I want to zoom out even further and talk about what this whole situation represents in terms of cultural shifts and generational tensions within hip-hop. Because this isn't just a 21 Savage story. This is a story about how hip-hop is evolving and who gets left behind in that evolution. We're at this really interesting moment in hip-hop where multiple generations are coexisting and competing for attention. You got the legends like Nas, Jay-Z, and others still dropping projects and demanding respect. You got the millennial stars like Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole who've been dominant for over a decade. You got Gen Z artists like Lil Tecca, Central C, and the SoundCloud generation carving out space. And then you got the next wave coming up with artists who are barely old enough to vote but already building massive followings on TikTok and other platforms. All of these generations are fighting for the same streaming real estate, the same festival slots, the same cultural relevance. And what we're seeing with 21 Savage and other artists from that Drake-era wave is that they're caught in a weird middle ground. They're not old enough to be legends who get a pass based on legacy, but they're also not young enough to be the fresh new thing that Gen Z is gravitating toward. They're in this awkward in-between space where they have to prove themselves all over again with every release. And the cultural conversation has shifted too. In the mid-2010s, when 21 was coming up, hip-hop was in this very specific moment where street credibility and a certain type of authenticity were highly valued. Fans wanted to know you were really from the streets, that you'd really lived the things you were rapping about. That's why 21's cold, emotionless delivery and his unflinching street narratives resonated so much. It felt real in a landscape where a lot of rap was becoming more pop and more commercial. But now, the conversation has evolved.
Gen Z listeners, who make up a huge portion of streaming audiences, they value different things. They care more about vibe than strict authenticity. They care more about aesthetic than street credibility. They care more about how music makes them feel than whether the artist has a documentable connection to the streets. Let that sink in. That's not a judgment. That's just a fact about how tastes have changed. So 21 Savage asking what happened to the streets is actually asking a deeper question. What happened to the values and the culture that made me a star? And the uncomfortable answer might be, those values are still there, but they're no longer the dominant force in mainstream hip-hop. They've been supplemented and in some cases replaced by new priorities, new sounds, and new modes of authenticity. Look at who's winning right now. Playboi Carti is winning by being weird, by making music that's abrasive and experimental and almost avant-garde. Tyler, the Creator, is winning by being a complete artist. Fashion, visuals, production, rapping, all of it cohesive and innovative. Kendrick is winning by being a storyteller and a poet who treats albums like literature. None of those artists are succeeding because of traditional street credibility. They're succeeding because they're pushing boundaries and giving fans something they can't get anywhere else. And that's the challenge for someone like 21 Savage. Real talk. How do you stay true to who you are, to that street foundation, to that cold delivery, to that Atlanta trap sound, while also evolving enough to stay relevant to an audience that's craving innovation? That's a tough needle to thread. And based on the What Happened to the Streets numbers, maybe he hasn't quite figured out that balance yet. But I also have sympathy for artists in his position, because the game has changed so fast. Like when 21 dropped Savage Mode in 2016, streaming was still relatively new. Artists could blow up overnight, the rules were still being written. Fast forward to 2025 and the landscape is completely different. The algorithm is king. Playlists control what gets heard. Virality is almost random. Trying to navigate that as an artist who came up in a different era, that's hard. And there's immense pressure from labels and management to adapt, to chase trends, to make more commercial music, to soften edges. But fans can tell when you're being inauthentic. They can sense when you're making music because you think it'll stream well rather than because you actually have something to say. So artists are stuck. Adapt and risk losing your core identity, or stay the same and risk becoming irrelevant. That's a brutal position to be in. And this brings up questions about hip-hop's future. Are we moving toward a place where street narratives and that raw authenticity become niche, underground sounds, while the mainstream becomes more experimental and vibe-focused? Or is this just a moment, and eventually there'll be a pendulum swing back toward valuing lyrical content and street credibility? Honestly, nobody knows. But what's clear is that the artists who are going to thrive are the ones who can balance authenticity with innovation, who can honor where they came from while pushing towards something new. 21 Savage's What Happened to the Streets is more than just an album. It's a question being posed to the entire culture. And maybe the numbers are the culture's way of answering. Maybe the streets are still there, but they're not the only thing that matters anymore. Maybe authenticity looks different now. Maybe the definition of what makes a great hip-hop album has expanded beyond what it used to be. And artists like 21 have to decide, do they fight that change, or do they find a way to evolve with it while staying true to their core? Alright, so let's bring this all together, because there's a lot to unpack here. Whew! 21 Savage's What Happened to the Streets dropped with 13.1 million first-day Spotify streams. Sounds decent until you realize that's only 1/3 of what his last album did. Listener drop-off was massive, with people not even making it to the midpoint of the track list. His viral interview 3 hours before release talked about everything except the album itself. And when you compare his numbers to other 2025 releases, whether it's legacy artists like Nas or new school artists, or even posthumous Mac Miller drops, the performance just doesn't stack up. But beyond the numbers, what we're really looking at is an artist at a crossroads. 21 Savage built a career on authenticity, on representing a specific sound in a specific perspective, and now the landscape is changing under his feet. The sound that dominated the mid to late 2010s, that Drake-affiliated moody trap vibe, is cooling off. Audiences want something different. They want innovation, experimentation, conceptual depth, and complete artistic visions. So the real question isn't, did this album flop? Because yeah, commercially it underperformed. The real question is, what does 21 Savage do next?
Does he double down on the straight sound and try to reclaim that lane? Does he experiment and risk alienating his core fans? Does he become more conceptual and introspective? Does he rebuild his rollout strategy from the ground up? Those are the decisions that will define the next chapter of his career and ultimately his legacy. And look, I'm not counting him out. Artists evolve. Careers have ups and downs. Some of the greatest albums ever made were commercial disappointments when they first dropped. Sometimes it takes time for people to appreciate what an artist was trying to do. Maybe what happened to the streets will age better than these initial numbers suggest. Maybe 5 years from now, people will look back and say, oh, that was actually the beginning of his most interesting creative period. But that's only going to happen if 21 and his team learn from this moment. The rollout was messy. The messaging was confused. The interview overshadowed the music. The streaming strategy didn't work. These are all fixable problems, but they require honesty, self-awareness, and a willingness to make changes. And for the hip-hop industry as a whole, this is a wake-up call. Streaming numbers aren't everything. Playlist placements aren't everything. Going viral for the wrong reasons can actually hurt your music. And audiences are getting smarter and more demanding. They want complete artistic visions, not just collections of songs thrown together to chase algorithm trends. The artists who understand that and commit to it are the ones who are going to thrive in the next era of hip-hop. So now I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think 21 Savage can bounce back from this? What should he do differently for his next project? Did you listen to what happened to the streets? And if so, what did you think? Does it deserve better than these numbers suggest, or are the numbers accurate? And bigger picture, do you think we're witnessing a generational shift in hip-hop where that Drake-era sound is officially over, or is this just a temporary dip? Also, let me know. Who do you think is winning in hip-hop right now in 2025? Is it Kendrick with the conceptual depth? Is it Tyler with the complete artistic vision? Is it Cardi with the experimental energy? Or is there somebody else you think is about to take over? I want to hear your takes because honestly, the culture is in such a fascinating place right now with so many different sounds and styles competing for dominance. And trust me, this story is far from over. More details are going to keep dropping. We might get responses from 21 or his team. We might see adjustments to the rollout strategy. There might be behind-the-scenes stories that come out about what went wrong. And you know I'm going to be covering every single update as it happens, breaking down every piece of information, analyzing every move. So if you want to stay locked in on this story and everything else happening in hip-hop, you gotta subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications. Before you go, please hit that like button if you found this breakdown valuable. It helps the algorithm push this video to more people who are interested in these deep dives into hip-hop culture and industry analysis. And honestly, I really appreciate everybody who takes the time to watch these longer videos. I know 40 minutes is a commitment, but these stories deserve the time and the nuance. Surface-level takes don't cut it when we're talking about an artist's career, the evolution of hip-hop, and the future of the culture. Stay safe out there, and remember, in the age of streaming, going viral, and algorithm-driven success, the artists who last are the ones who stay true to their vision, who build genuine connections with fans, and who make music that matters beyond just the numbers. Let's see if 21 Savage can embody that moving forward. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.